Okay, minding your business community. I'm your host, Champ Ron. This is the Minding Your Business podcast, entrepreneurship, real estate, trending news. There's no business like minding your own. We're here at episode number 181, recording this on Friday, July the 31st. Well, July was a long month. I'll tell you, had good things going, but man, it just seemed like it dragged on. Unlike some of the other months in our quarantine glory that have passed by a little bit faster. We're heading quickly to month number 5 of social distancing and quarantine. So I hope everything is going well and you've had a tremendous day and a tremendous week. I'm excited about today's guest. Joining here from California, Mr. Reed Goossens joins. He is the podcast host of Investing in the U.S., which almost had me late for this podcast because I was listening to an episode and then he popped up on the screen. And I was like, oh shit, I got to record my own podcast. But he joins, and we're going to talk about a myriad of things. He's the best-selling author on Amazon, Investing in the U.S., as well as 10,000 Miles to the American Dream. Reed, sir, thank you so much, my man, for joining today. It's tremendous to have you on.
Hey, Champ, mate, it's great to be here, big fella. I'm looking forward to getting into it and hopefully sharing a bit of knowledge with your listeners.
Yep, absolutely. No doubt about it. And NYB community, you know that you can subscribe and support the podcast as you always do. 5-star on Apple helps us continue to reach the audience and expand, that connection as we bring to you great folks like Reed to share their background. And of course, you can go to themybpodcast.com. And when you go to listen to the podcast, make sure I'm going to go ahead and position this now, and I'll share it a little later. Make sure that you subscribe and support the Investing in the U.S. podcast. Make sure that you do that. So when you get done, subscribe to that podcast, add it to your arsenal, as I like to say. Add that. It's another tool in your tool belt. Tremendous guest that Reed has, and another place where you can get great insight as you go along your journey. Reed, let's jump right into it, my man.
Sure.
You're originally from Australia. All right.
Correct.
I've never been to Australia. I never have.
You need to go, my friend. If you ever go, let me know and I'll give you all the best advice.
Yes. You give me all the hot spots and all of that. So why America from Australia? Let me start there. What's your origin story?
Mm-hmm.
And what were you doing in Australia prior to coming over here to the States?
Yeah, so mate, really it was a whole bunch of awesome stuff that I happened to do leaving university. So I left university in 2007 and I graduated as a structural engineer. That's my background. That's my trade, so to speak.
Oh, wow.
And I went straight to London to work on the 2012 Olympic Games, but in 2008, building the infrastructure for the Games. And it was an incredible experience. First year out of uni. I only had a year visa at that point. And then at the end of that time, at the end of 2008, I wasn't ready to move home. And so I moved to the south of France. A good friend of mine was in the yachting business down there. If you've ever seen the show Below Deck on Bravo, it's exactly the same thing I went and did in the Mediterranean, the south of France. And I did it for about a season, so a full year. And during that time, I actually met my now wife, right, Erica, who's American. We met backpacking on the beaches of Spain.
Excellent.
Cut a long story short, moved back to Australia in 2010. After 2 years of gallivanting around the world, sitting in a cubicle in my office and being a civil engineer, structural engineer, and just going, I have so much more to give. And from that, I stumbled across the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, and that was a spark to get me going. And that was really at that point, it took the blinkers off where I wanted to go in my life and realized that, okay, I might not love structural engineering, but maybe there's some things that I could learn being in the business, rubbing shoulders with real estate developers and all that sort of stuff. So started educating myself 2010, 2011. And then in 2011, Erica, who moved to Australia for a year, her master's was up. And I said, hey, let's move back to the US. And that was really the time that I said, screw it, let's back ourselves and let's move to New York City. And the thing was, mate, I moved here just to chase a dream. And the dream was just to live in New York City, be an expat, move back to Australia in a couple of years. But obviously through that, I discovered real estate here. The barriers to entry is so much lower than they are in Australia. And over the last 8 years, to build something pretty incredible. And I don't sit here, try to boast about what I've done. I sit here to try and inspire other people that if I can move 10,000 miles from Australia with limited funds, no network, trying to have a relationship with this girl and give it a go, it's, the average American can do it. And so for me, sometimes you don't, when you do have those blinkers on, and I'm talking more towards the American folks, it takes someone who's an international to say, hey, you've got some pretty freaking awesome stuff going on in your backyard. Pay attention,
Right, exactly.
And so, part of what, quote unquote, my superpower is perspective, right? I come from a country that doesn't have as much incredible opportunities as the United States does from a real estate investing point of view. So in a nutshell, without going on too long, that's how I came to the United States.
Yeah, definitely. Compare and contrast real estate real quick, Reed, from Australia to the United States. I know you mentioned there's not a ton of opportunity, right, in Australia compared to the United States. What is the real estate market like there? And why do you think there's not as much opportunity when you compare the two?
Well, I'll redefine opportunity. Maybe I shouldn't use that.
Sure.
Shouldn't have used that word. Think of Australia like New York, San Francisco, LA. High appreciation markets, not a lot of cash flow. So when I moved to the United States and realized, wow, there's these secondary and tertiary markets that I can buy houses for $50,000, I was blown away. Right now, don't get me wrong. A lot of real estate developers, and I've worked for them both here in LA and New York, make a lot of money investing in these high appreciation markets, right? And that's
absolutely.
That's really, you think of London, you think of Sydney, you think of Hong Kong, you think of other Western countries, Paris. They're all very high appreciation markets, and the reason they're high appreciation markets is because of supply and demand. And given the fact that Australia is also a very small population, it's only about 24 million people, 25 million people. On the same land mass as mainland America, it's just we've got so much land, but the problem is we can't inhabit all of it because it's a desert. So we're all confined to the coast. Everyone wants to live on the coast. That drives up demand. The supply is slow. The population is lower than the United States. So compare that to 350 odd million people you have here in the country, and you can inhabit from north to south, from east to west. And that drives these secondary and tertiary markets. And that's where it was that was the eye, when I talk about opportunity, that was the benefits the barriers to entry. I could go to these secondary and tertiary markets and buy something for less than $100,000. You couldn't do that in Australia. And that's what I meant by opportunity. So just redefining it that a little bit.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thanks for clearing that. That definitely makes sense. And so, Reed, as you get here to America and you're getting started, with your business, what are some of the things you're investing in early on? Were there, obviously some great strengths, I imagine, and things that you really enjoyed kind of early on, and then maybe some obstacles that you faced. Can you kind of unpack some of that for us?
Yeah. So I literally remember being rock up to New York City. So prior coming to the States, I talk about the Rich Dad Poor Dad book, and in all throughout 2011, I was educating myself at local real estate investing clubs in Australia, and I was going to do something in Aussie like a fix and flip or a lease option. But then I moved, saved up some money, and I spent half of it moving to the United States to chase this deal. So when I rock up to the US, I was completely blown away by the REIAs, the Real Estate Investment Associations, and we don't have that in Australia. The one club I went to in Australia was it happened to be my local city, and it was years ago there was nothing else around. So when I came to the US, it was like networking on steroids, particularly in New York, right? So. I remember being my first REIA event, paying $20 at the door, and just going, "Oh my gosh, the amount of incredible information that is coming towards me for paying $20." I would have to pay a guru in Australia $10,000 to do that. So it was just this whole tapestry of networking and getting your networking game better that I started to put myself out there. And through going to those events, I was able to meet other people, meet other locals. I had to learn about the different lingo here. I didn't know what a credit score was, or what's an LLC or EIN. So I had to reshape the way I thought about real estate. But at the same time, I found these little markets that were 4 hours drive from New York City, Syracuse, New York. And I remember getting on the Greyhound bus every Saturday, for a period of a couple of months, or every second Saturday. I'd be out at 4 hours on the Greyhound bus up to Syracuse. The little broker would come pick me up, and he would take me touring duplexes and triplexes. And within 6 months of moving to the US, I bought my first little property. So in a nutshell, the bug had already bitten me prior to come to the US, and it was more to do with that. Okay, the barriers to entry are a lot lower here, and I can start making cash flow from the money that I had. And don't forget, the banks didn't lend to me. I had to buy all cash because
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, being fresh off the boat, I had no credit, right? Zero credit. So it was like, screw it, it's my money. I'm gonna invest in this deal, and that's what I did. So
yeah. I was going to ask that, as someone with a banking background, I was going to ask how you found, and maybe comparing and contrasting, banks in Australia versus, banks here. Were they willing to lend to you? So I was curious about that. And so obviously in the beginning, without having credit and anything like that established, it was difficult to get the capital. And so you had to use a lot of cash, existing cash flow to fund deals.
Well, existing cash in the bank, and that's what I came with, probably 35, 40 grand, and I literally spent all of it on that first property. and it was more the mindset of I needed to get going, right? You don't get to deal number 10 without doing deal number 1. And at that point, I'd been self-educating for about 2.5 years now. And I knew that I had two options to do. I could keep investing in mentorships and blah, 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 or I could go and actually do a deal and learn. If it was the mistakes were made, they were my mistakes because it was my money. It was no one else's money. And that's the most important thing that I've got for your listeners, is that it's not about smacking the first deal out of the park. It is literally about getting off the start blocks. That's all it is. And you will have mistakes. And if you're okay with having some mistakes in your life and in your growth, then that you're willing to go and take those educated risks to propel yourself towards those goals that you want to achieve.
Yeah, and Reed, I love the way you position that, is being able to have make educated mistakes based on having as much vetted information as possible, but understanding that mistakes are going to be made. And then I think if you listen to what Reed's saying is, as you get started, whether you're real estate or whatever it is that you're doing, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable in that aspect of your mistakes are going to be made. And so if you're sitting and waiting for it to be, this perfect, paved road, we're both here to tell you that that's not likely to be the case. So Reed, exactly. Reed, as the business starts to grow, at what point do you see in your pathway where you're like, man, this I can really make a big difference here. I can really generate a not just a cash flowing business, but when I see the impact of the podcast, and we'll get into the books here in a little bit, but at what point did you see, even if you're making mistakes in those early deals, what point did you see, that light that says, you know what, man, I can really knock it out of the box with this, in this real estate game? Yeah,
look, it was always there, and don't get me wrong. The mistakes that I made, they're not necessarily mistakes; they're lessons, right? Like the first 6 months of my first property, I bought it all cash. I was able to get a line of credit and buy the deal number 2. So, and then that deal number 2 got me to deal number 3. So already within the first sort of 12 to 18 months of being in the United States, I had 3 little deals under my belt. Now, investing $45,000 of my own cash, like it already got me off to the races. I already had a taste of it, right? And through a conversation I had with a good friend of mine at the end of 2013 in New York City, he came down from Canada. He said to me, I was boasting to him. I said, oh, look, I've got these 4 or 5 units or 6 units. I can't remember how much I had. I didn't have a lot, but it was enough to be like, oh, look at this, I'm crushing it. Sit down, my friend. Sit down, grasshopper. I'll tell you all that you know. Being a bit full of myself, and my mate's like, oh man, that's so awesome. I just closed on a 70 unit, and I said, 70, like 70, and he said, yeah, 70. How the hell did you close on 70 units? And he talked to me about his mentor. He talked to me about other people's money. He spoke to me about seller carryback finance. All these things that I knew were real, but needed to see a friend that I held at very high esteem. Well, he's doing it. Why can't I do it? And I knew at the time there that I was getting to a point where I'd avoided getting mentors up until that stage. And I knew I was getting to the end of my tether. And I had, 3 little properties. It wasn't, maybe it was $1,000 in cash flow a month. Nothing to turn your nose up at, but it wasn't like, here we go, I'm quitting the job tomorrow. Like
Right.
it ain't that did not happen. And
Right.
so through that conversation, I knew that I was like, okay, if I'm going to take myself seriously, I need to go get a mentor. I need to do
Yeah.
it. I need to go invest in myself. That's when I actually sold one of the first properties. I made a little bit of money, made some cash flow, and I was able to use that money to invest in a mentor. And I was very frugal with my mentor. I didn't go and spend tens of thousands of dollars. I spent $2,500, and it was
Yeah.
someone who'd only done one big deal, but I aspired to do that big deal. And it was literally the act of me paying that money was for me to say, hey, I'm worth it, and I give myself permission to go off and raise the bar. And that's the most important thing about getting a mentor.
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree. And I work the same way with my mentor. And I learned that early on, like you talked about lessons read. I learned that early on with a mentor. And then I also learned it with property management. And I wanted to get your take, because I remember listening to an episode of your podcast where you talked about property management. So share with the audience kind of your thought, because, and the reason I asked that at this point is because there are people that look to get in, and I've always had this conversation as people have debated, should I use property management in terms of managing the rental for me, or should I do it myself? And there's the economic balance of it, there's the time, all those type of things. How do you want to kind of unpack that?
Yeah, look, when I got my first property, I always had a property manager. As much as looking back, some of the mistakes on those smaller, cheaper properties was the fact that I only had one or two of them, and he had 500 that he had to manage. So was I really a massive, was he the most focused on my two deals? And the answer was no, right? Like it wasn't. And so how was I know he was going to get the right tenants in there? And, part of the first property I had a drive-by shooting at the property because of one of the tenants' sons, so not that it was that's a mistake. It's just more to do with, okay, understanding that if you're going to be in this game, in the low socioeconomic housing game, you may need to buy more of them to have more of a pool to diversify over, right? So we also realized maybe Section 8 housing was not for me, and I wanted to get into more market-based housing, but still in the scale of it, right? And that was where buying duplexes and triplexes wasn't going to scale me a ton, right? And that's where I needed to get into the large commercial multifamily. And that's what my mentor did, and that's what we ended up going off and achieving and what I built to this day. So, but back to your original property management thing, I think you always need to have it. I think it's particularly if you're getting started. Understand what you're buying, right? So if you're buying a single family property, who's going to manage it for you? Are you even in the city that the property's in? If you're in the city, maybe there's a little bit more of an argument to learn the process and do it yourself. If you're not, you're investing into state, go and get a property manager so you can see what they do, but understand if you're one property out of their 500 properties that they run, you may need to just have a bit of tempered expectations in terms of, okay, they may not get the right tenant off the first go. It may sit vacant for a couple of months. That's okay, because you only command one out of 500. Now, if you went with them with 10 properties, little properties, maybe there's a little bit more respect, or not respect, but a little bit more attention. And so even today, as we still have third-party property management, we have 2,000 units, all in the large commercial multifamily space. But there will come a time as we grow the business that we'll have to bring property management in-house, because it gets to a point of scale. It doesn't make sense to pay someone else when you have 3,000 units, because we could profit ourselves. So that's, whatever end of the spectrum we're on, property management is key. Finding the right property manager is tough. But I know people who've been very successful starting with a single family or a duplex in their backyard, in their neighborhoods that they live in, and learning from the grassroots. And that's a good way to learn, right? Because you get your hands dirty. So it really is horses for courses, really understanding where you're investing, why you're investing, and how can you maximize that investment. And maybe you aren't the right person to do that. Maybe it's a third party, or maybe you think, you know what, I can do this. Let's go give it a crack. So it's going to be on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And you described some of the way that I started, Reed. I started with, those single family resident homes, managing them myself. And although I didn't necessarily I had something close. I didn't have the drive-by, but I did have a delinquent tenant that was in, here in Memphis, a part of town that's, a little bit more economically challenged.
Mm-hmm.
I went one day after I was actually still working at the bank while I had this property, and I was managing it myself, and it had gotten delinquent, okay, in the payment. So, and the tenant was dodging my phone calls, dodging my communication. And so one day after we closed down the bank branch that I was working in, I drove over there, and I was concerned. So I've got I had a handgun, right?
Wow.
And so, I've got a handgun in my belt, just because, I have no idea what's going to go on, how it's going to pop off. So I get there and I'm having to deal with that. And of course, the tenant that was on the contract, wasn't there at the time, but there was another adult there. And he and I ended up having some words, although, because this person was dating the tenant and that sort of thing. And so, this person had words for me. I had then words back for him. And so, I'm kind of, I got my hand kind of close back, where my handgun is. And so I got back in the car, and eventually we were able to get squared up, and then they left. But one of the challenges got me in the management, because I said, what, I don't, for me, I don't need to get into this where I'm having to go and take these type of actions with people. That's not really what I want to do. And so I had a buddy that's got a property management company here in Memphis that I use and use to this day. And he and his company have been tremendous. But yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, it varies from person to person. Particularly like you say, if you're in market, or if you're currently working a job and you're investing and you don't necessarily have the time, then definitely get into property management. But learn the game as well. There's nothing wrong with that as well.
You've got a prime example of learning the game.
Yeah.
Having some sketchy encounters with some tenants. That's not. It ain't. You don't want to have sketchy encounters. You want everyone, to do the right thing. But it's hard when it's your money in this deal, right? It's your baby,
right,
and you want to protect it as much as you can. So yeah.
Yep, no doubt about it. Reed Goossens is our guest today here on the Minding Your Business podcast, episode 181. Let's dive into the book, or the books, sure. I should say, Reed. Let's start with Investing in the U.S., which is also the name of the podcast. So, tell me what's the premise of the book, what we should expect for those of us that are reading it, and kind of who the book was more tailored to. Was it more tailored to kind of a global audience, or maybe people that are starting up in real estate, or maybe even folks that have been pretty seasoned in real estate? So kind of share that with us.
Yeah, so the book came from reusing content. So I got to the point with the podcast that I'd had created all this audio content, and I just was going to reuse it and put it into book form. That's the beauty of when you create content. You can repurpose it as much as you want.
Absolutely.
So for me, it wasn't trying to sell 1 million copies, right? It was more for an extension of the business card to continue to grow another platform in written content, taking it from audio. And it's really just a step-by-step guide for how I learnt the US investing game. That's for both internationals and for local. And I have a lot more people reading it on the local level than I do international level. There's actually only one chapter about international people and how they get set up here in the United States legally in order to start investing. But the rest of it is really just me learning about the investing lingo, developing your A team, finding a market, understanding syndication, understanding 1031s, understanding taxes, understanding how to underwrite a deal just from the high level numbers. All that stuff was really what I was learning, and I put it into the podcast, and that podcast then we created into a book. I will say, when I first wrote the book, it read like a textbook. Being a structural engineer, it was a little bit black. It was a little bit black and white, just to say, and I had to add a little bit of grey in there, and that's where I got to help, intertwining the story between the chapters and in the pages to really help be emotive in terms of how to get across the point of view that of what I was trying to talk about. So for me, it's been a great little book. I actually have a copy up here. I'll just grab this. Where is it? Yeah, so for those people who can see this, if they're watching it, it's Investing in the US, the Ultimate Guide to US Real Estate. We actually just went on audio, audible.com. yeah, it's just to really educate everyone about the benefits of investing here in the United States, with happen to be with my story intertwined, and a bit of Aussieisms in there. We talk a little bit about different slang words that I use, and it's
Right.
a little bit of fun. So yeah,
There you go. Yep, excellent. So, and of course, that it's available at readgoose.com or on Amazon, correct?
that is correct. Yep.
Yep, awesome. Yep. So NYB, make sure you go there. Go to readgoossens.com. Readgoossens.com. Make sure you go there, pick up a copy, and of course, definitely let Reed know that you heard him right here on the Minding Your Business podcast, and share great feedback with them, as I always encourage you to do. And so, compare that then with 10,000 Miles to the American Dream. I think that's interesting for someone that's come over, in more recent times to the United States to speak on that subject. So, what can we expect from that book as well?
So that book's a little different, and what it started with an idea that I had about 3 or 4 years ago. Actually, probably a little bit longer than that now. I'd started the podcast. It was in the early stages. This is pre even the first book coming out, or the idea of the first book. And I'd interviewed these other Aussies. Someone was like, "Oh, have you heard about Reed? He's an Aussie. He's here. You need to connect with this other Aussie who's in New York or who's in Dallas or whatever." And so through these connections with these guys, I just said, "Hey, you guys don't know each other. Let's start a monthly mentorship group. Just not mentorship, mastermind, where we just get on the phone. We have a bit of banter. We're all Aussies. We're all out here trying to give it a go."
Right.
And through those conversations and over a period of a couple of years, we all started to realize we're starting to achieve financial freedom through what we were doing. And we became good mates, and we ultimately said, well, let's share our story with people, right? And so there's 8 of us, including myself, and each person has a slightly different story and a slightly different asset class in which they've achieved the financial freedom, which is also the interesting part. We've got a guy in there who does mobile home parks. We've got another guy who does fix and flipping turnkey properties in San Antonio. We've got another guy who moved out here to start a real estate tech company in the Silicon Valley. Myself, I talk about in and around branding. I've got another guy who's talking about multifamily, obviously. And it's just sharing a collection of stories and our different perspectives coming to the United States and all of us achieving a financial freedom. I wasn't the only one. My story is about that. But I quickly realized that there's actually a couple of other good blokes that are all doing the same thing. And it was interesting to say, let's put it into a book, and everyone's got an individual chapter. And it's again a little bit. We've got a few caricatures in there of everyone's ugly mug, which is pretty funny. And it's just a good bit of fun at the same time.
Well, and that's good. And I love that, kind of the overarching theme for both books, which is the repurposing of content, and you use content efficiently. And you're exactly right, Reed. I agree with you wholeheartedly, man. That's one of the great things about creating content, right? Whether it's on the podcast, written, verbal, whatever it is how you can repurpose it. And there's so many different avenues and channels, and the expense and time to do it now is different than it was, in the past. And so that's tremendous, and it's great to see you creatively, do that and kind of package it for various audiences. And so let's get into some comparison contrast here, because you did a lot of transitioning during times that were there were a lot of obstacles, even just internationally, right? You talked about, doing things through 08 and 09 and 10, where we had that particular kind of downturn economically worldwide and that sort of thing. And of course, now we're all familiar now with COVID-19, the coronavirus, and the impact that has had. I guess first, what's been the impact that you're aware of in Australia compared to the United States? I'd love to, first let me hear that, and then I want to ask you some about real estate, but.
Yeah, look, the impact's been similar. We're not going to get political about who's handled it better, but
right.
we've had our second wave. It's definitely not as. I spoke to my dad the other day. They're not at mask stages or required to wear masks, but there has been a few spikes in Victoria.
Okay.
And so that is, I think they're requiring in Victoria to wear masks. They have shut down the borders again. All international travel has 2 weeks minimum quarantine coming in, regardless if you're Australian or not. So a lot of international travel back to Australia has really become not a thing.
Sure.
Even my dad just trying to cross the border into another state to see my sister. Apparently that's not happening as of this week. The cases have flared back up again. So Yeah,
Sure.
definitely struggling, but haven't been as the lockdown happened and then they slowly started opening. Like I know that they did a more of a phased approach where you could have 5 people gatherings, and then for 5 people went to 10 people, and then from 10 people went to 25 people. So it was a little bit more stage rather than trying to open everything at once, depending on what state you live here in the United States. So, but as in terms of real estate, look, the beauty of, well, not the beauty, 2008 was a very much an American issue that spread across the world. Today, it's a pandemic, and it's rent is due if you're in Canada, Mexico, Europe, London, Australia, New Zealand. It's due. There's landlords wanting their rent, and that is an interesting thing. Just to take a pause there for a second to think about. Well, how are we all going to react, or how are we all going to get out of the gates as this starts to unwind? And it has started unwinding. We're sitting here talking at the end of July. You know, Texas, where I've invested, they opened up in early May, and they've had to pull it back a little bit.
Sure.
But don't forget that it's happening across the world, right? And this is not poor America. This is a global pandemic, and where you're invested. So if you're invested in Sydney, or if you're invested in Auckland, or if you're invested in London, or if you're invested in Austin, how is each city reacting to that? And how quickly, when we all have the green light, are we going to get out of the gates? And that is that's going to be a fascinating thing to see unwind as we start to work through this, and hopefully by the end of the year and into the new year, we have some sort of vaccine. Because I think everything is, people are being affected. Like we, as real estate investors, we're a people game. We're actually in the business of people, right? And it was 100% clarity to me in late March when the pandemic hit. We needed to be people first in our business, right? So what did that mean? That mean that we needed to get in front of the tenants and say, hey, we understand this is a scary time and you don't know what's going on. You may have lost your job, but it ain't your fault. We are not going to be the big bad landlord to kick you out. We want to try and help you. And so making sure tenants felt heard and appreciated, our staff felt heard and appreciated, and our investors, keeping them abreast of what is happening, but really making sure that the people who occupy our units and run our assets are being safe and healthy first and foremost. Because when you have fear in the market, people do silly things, right? And so trying to bring a sense of not normalcy, but a sense of calm and getting out in front of it early as best you can, I think is helping us. And I think across the board, multifamily, particularly in the commercial space, is doing really, really quite well. We're over 98, 99% collected as of this month. In April, we dropped to, I think, 90, 96. We have seen, some assets are doing really, really well, and some assets are doing not as well. And it depends on where you are in your transition of your business plan, right? And so we've definitely seen that our assets in Austin, which are a little bit more tech forward, have been able to accommodate the virtual tours a lot easier than, say, some of our assets in San Antonio, which is a little bit more blue collar Hispanic workforce housing, who may not necessarily have an iPhone, right? So there's all these different things that we are experiencing, and it really boils down to, where were you in the business plan as COVID hit? And that's really, for me, part of the business plan on all our assets is we like to try and bring the average demographic, average household income up. Maybe it's only $40,000 when we buy it per household. We want to try and bring it up to $60,000 or $70,000. That doesn't happen overnight, right? And we've got a couple assets last year that we're now like, okay, there's a unfortunately, this pandemic is hitting the low socioeconomic, brothers and sisters of the world, right? So we have to be aware of that and try our best to make sure everyone is safe and is healthy. But at the end of the day, like, also trying to be that we're there for them, and we don't want to kick them out, but we have seen a bit of a turnover of people skipping, a small percentage, but again, through fear, they don't know what's coming down the road. They don't know when they're going to get employed again. And when you're paycheck to paycheck, hand to mouth, or you're in the service industry or in the construction industry, things came to a grinding halt in April, and that's scary, right? And if you can't keep food on your table, then you might need to move in with someone else, and that's okay. But like, we have to, as business owners, make sure we're navigating those waters as best we can, and that's probably been a very, not difficult, but eye-opening experience to really realize we are in the people business, and without our tenants, we don't have a business. So
yeah, exactly. And you spoke about being in the people business, and you talked really what you were describing is the high character that's required of being a landlord, right?
Correct.
Even though it may have a negative connotation in some aspects, at an individual, more micro level, having high character, and even in these type of situations that are completely unprecedented for all of us, right?
Right.
I've got a much smaller portfolio, and that's one of the things that I've always had with my tenants is that communication been tremendous, and I'm 100% on action. I think it became from what you described was early on. Well, one, going back, Reed, have that relationship leading into it, right? So it's not something like you described. It's not something that just starts as soon as the news hits, right? You have that conversation and you have that relationship, and so because you have that openness, anything that, like you say, becomes an impact is something you can get in front of, right?
Correct.
And then strategically think through solutions. And if there is a major impact or blowout, you don't get ghosted as the business owner, and then you're not in a tough spot as a tenant. Because look, here's the deal. I saw the Bureau of Labor Statistics read and get your thoughts on this. 21 billion is delinquent in this. I mean, just in the United States alone. So you talked about this being global. Just in the United States, 21 billion with a B, MYB. Currently right now is delinquent, where you combine, kind of rent and mortgage. And so, what would you recommend for, again, all those, what could be millions of people now that, those moratoriums are falling for, not, people stay out of their homes. What would you recommend for those business owners and those tenants, at this point? What would be kind of one thing you'd recommend to them?
Yeah, look, as business owners, I think there comes a point where hopefully up until this point you've been able to implement payment plans, reducing credit card fees, allowing third-party people to help you or help the tenants pay their rent, so from brothers, sisters, or family members. But there does come a time where now we're in the situation now in a couple of our assets where we had to have offered rent forgiveness, which means we're not going to evict you, but we know that you're not going to get out of this hole that you've dug, or this accrual of rent over a period of time. So can we have the keys back? It's not going to go a mark on your record. We understand it's not, but we need to keep the asset full and paying rent on time, because we can't keep having delinquency. And so we're starting to turn a corner in that, rather than going down the path of eviction, try to go down the path of, we'll take it on the chin. You owe us 3 months of rent. It's a business decision, but we're not also trying to hammer you because you lost your job in the pandemic, and we know you're trying to get a new one. So it's a little bit of give and take, and that obviously impacts the books, and that impacts the cash flow, and we have to pause distributions to our investors, and some assets are still being paused, right, as we still go through this. And the second wave that's hit Austin and San Antonio, the longer this thing goes on for, the longer it's going to hurt, right? And we ain't through it yet. We ain't through the woods. We're still very close to the fire. So for me as a business owner, when I hear that, like I heard the other day around 4th of July, our leasing centers shut back down again. I was like, oh gosh, this is going to hurt. This is going to impact. And because what happens is when you have the leasing centers shut down, particularly that summer, right? Summer is when we make the most hay. When the sun's shining, make hay, as they say. But the fact that you've got people still moving out, i.e. through evictions, or not evictions, or through feeling pressure to move out, or people, we actually notice a lot of people are continuing to buy houses, which is nuts.
Of course.
But if you have, say, 10 people move out in a month, and you only have, but your traffic, because there's no open leasing center, has divided by 4. So you're going from, say, 30 people a month to now 5 people a month, but you have 10 people moving out. When the opportunity to capture leases is really hampered, hampered in the fact that you can't sell more to the prospective tenants. So we've seen that be a big impact. And as best as the teams are trying to pivot to online leasing, and I do think this pandemic has forced the business of property management to come into the the 21st century and
Sure.
real estate as a
Right.
whole.
Right.
And because it's not as it is somewhat technologically savvy, but sometimes it is not because it's very mano a mano. They want to see the unit. So
Right.
it's forced us to be better, if that's the right word to use, and try and hopefully the practices we've got through, establishing through COVID will be with us post-COVID as we come into this new world. But we're still in the fire. We're still trying to dig out of it. Overall, from a high-level point of view, multifamily is doing so much better than any other commercial asset class that I know of. Think of retail, think of hospitality, think of office space, and I think over the long term, or the medium to long term, we will see multifamily prices just keep heating up because there'll be a lot of capital flight into those asset classes where people, the two human needs is food and shelter, right? So if you have a self-storage bill, it probably ain't getting paid, but if you need to keep food on your table and your rent paid so you are not on the streets, that's the priority. And so for us, we think multifamily is going to come out of this glowing, and it is glowing today. There obviously is individual deals, they've got their individual issues, but overall, I think it's not going to be like 2008 in terms of people handing back over keys. The banks don't want to deal with that, and that's why the Fed got in front of it by the stimulus packages. With the stimulus packages, I also think that you will see some sort of inflation at some extent. It will probably come back down. But with that means the fact that hard assets are going to be even more attractive, right? People want to invest more in hard assets. So again, we'll keep driving competition, which will keep, with low interest rates, will keep driving down, cap rates. So overall, I think over the medium to long term, we'll come out of this glowing. But don't forget we are in the people business, and that's been the biggest thing that I've noticed since this pandemic hit.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Great insight analysis there, Reed. I think for us all, I was able to jot down some notes on some things that I want to go back and take a look at, even just within my from what you said. Let's get into the podcast a little bit. Okay, so I was listening to it before we started reading this. And you described earlier. Describe the podcast. What motivated you to do the podcast? I love the production on it. I love the conversations that you have. Very organic. And sometimes that's to me, in my opinion, that's a little unique particularly in the business real estate space, having those organic conversations. Sometimes, in real estate, they can be very starchy and, that sort of thing. And so, it's good to have, just human being conversations, right? Without it being, so rigid.
Look, and you hit the nail on the head. At the beginning, when I started, to answer that first question, it was all about trying to develop an investor database, right? To try and share my story with the quote unquote world. I was experiencing stuff, coming from Australia to America that I thought other people might be interested in, right? And I started with a very niche target of international folks. Over time, that's pivoted. We've been going for nearly 5 years now. And I pivoted to, I get listeners from, actually the majority of my listeners are Americans, but we listen in over 35 countries around the world. And it's more to do back to where being over 5 years, you're right. It does come down to organic, natural conversations where you can tease out someone's, how they think, how they tick, and really like how they've built something from nothing and try and craft, a story, not craft a story, try and tease out the golden nuggets and information from that conversation in and around teasing out their story, if that makes sense. So
yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't happen overnight. I was, when I first started, I was very rigid. I'm sure only my grandmother and my mum were listening to it, but over time you slowly build a little following. And for me, it ain't about being Tony Robbins. It ain't about having millions of followers. It's about having a tribe of people that really love what I say and do. And that's enough for me to go out and raise money and buy more deals and share my growth with the wider world and what I'm learning by interviewing other people who are the cream of the crop in the business. And that is valuable, right? That's education. Exactly what you're doing right now. It's exactly. It's about conversations, and there are a lot of podcasts out there. But the thing is, you've got to be consistent. Like you told me, you've been going for 3 years now. That's incredible. Like, keep going, right? Don't stop. And for me,
Absolutely.
I now use my podcast. I don't make any money from it per se. Like I can't track an investor who's invested $500,000 with me saying, "Oh, how'd you hear me?" You know what I mean? But
Right.
I get so much joy, and the juices flow through me when I get on podcasts like this. I talk to people like yourself. We're at that frequency where we can just jam. I'm not a
Yeah.
musician, but this is the closest thing to jamming
Right.
I've
Right.
got. So, press play and let's have a good
Right.
conversation. So,
There
yeah.
you go. Yeah, no doubt about it. And so, Reed Goossens is our guest today. Make sure you check out Investing in the U.S. Podcast wherever you get your pods. Leave a 5-star review, comment review on Apple Podcasts for Investing in the U.S. And again, add that to your Arsenal MYB community. We always recommend great content and content producers all around, so you get a holistic perspective from many different great people. Fun question for you, Reed.
Let's do it.
I'd like to ask a lot of my guests this, and I love the feedback and answers I tend to get all the way around holistically. If I were to bring you $100 million in cash,
Mm-hmm.
all right, no strings attached, no nothing, I just pull up a Brinks truck and we just knock on the door and here, Reed, I'm feeling gracious today. Here's $100 million. What would you do with that and why?
The right thing to say, and is probably give most of it away, because the fact is, it ain't mine. I didn't earn it, right? I might take a small portion of it and invest it for myself, but I think the vast majority of it, I'd give it away to people who need it. In causes that resonate with me. I've had loss in my family through cancer, so cancer is a really big one for me. Trying to give back to my communities that I invest in is another big thing. But again, the satisfaction of just being given something, it doesn't sit right with me. And I'd use probably part of it to grow my portfolio, but a vast majority of it, I'd probably give it away because it ain't mine. I didn't earn it. And so easy come, easy go. And I've been brought up with my parents have always taught me the value of a dollar and how to earn a dollar so you respect it. And that's the most important thing in my life. When you're given stuff, sometimes the subconscious goes, okay, that was easy. I'm going to spend it just as easy the other way out. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but it's sort of my answer for what I'd do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see you definitely giving a lot of it away. Probably, creating affordable housing would probably be something, because you talked about that earlier.
Yep.
And doing some, probably investing and educating from that standpoint. So I'm with you. I'm definitely with you, my man. As we wrap, because you've given us a ton of nuggets today, Reed, just in a short period of time. What are just one or two best practices work for you that you think will work for others? Because here's the deal, people listening to this podcast, this episode, or maybe young in their business or young in their walk. They may be a little fearful about taking that step. It's difficult, particularly in this time, of any time, to say, hey, I've got the $55,000 a year job. I don't really care for it. I'd rather be investing real estate, but like I said, I've got to pay rent. I got to pay the mortgage. I got car note, kids' school, all these different things. Maybe they don't want to, stir the bee's nest with the spouse. Like, you're gonna do what? And so everybody's, in these different spaces. So what are just one or two best practices that have worked for you, that have helped you, kind of throughout your walk thus far, that you think will help others?
I love what you said about walk. We're such in a world of comparison, right? We're always comparing ourselves to one another on Instagram and Facebook and social media, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
For me, it is all about consistency and discipline. And also having the right mindset on the front end. So when I say mindset, I mean a couple of things. Not being fearful of what could go wrong. My whole story about the coming to America thing. Like, I got comfortable with the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario for me is I moved here, I didn't get a job, I moved back home. That was it, right? But at least I gave it a go. I gave it a crack, right? And for me, I had the fear of regret, and I would hate to wake up when I'm 70 years of age and go, geez, I wish I'd given that a go. I wish I'd pushed myself to do something. And so that's what I implore people to do every single day. Push your boundaries, as whatever those boundaries might be, each and every single day, so you get used to being uncomfortable. And over time, through consistency of doing that, you will see that you've come a long way towards your goals. Now, when it comes specifically to, you're talking about a spouse, right?
Yeah.
You talk about quitting your day job. It took me over 8 years when I picked up the book Rich Dad Poor Dad before the day I could actually quit my job, right?
Yeah.
It takes time. And so many people quit because they don't have the right mindset on the front end. And when I say mindset, they think it's going to happen tomorrow, back to that instant gratification. And the old saying that Tony Robbins says, you can overestimate what you can achieve in a year, but you can underestimate what you can achieve in a decade. And that's exactly the point. You need to be consistent. You need to understand this is going to take time. You don't, let's talk about something we all, being fit and losing weight. If you think you're going to lose 30 pounds in a month, you're joking, right? But if you say I'm going to fitness is going to become part of my DNA and I'm going to incorporate it into my everyday life, day in, day out, 365 days a year, then you're going to start seeing results. The same thing applies when you go and invest in real estate. You have to make it come part of your DNA. You have to understand it will take time, and that's okay. The other thing I really implore people to do is enjoy the journey, because everyone wants to get, boom, I want to be on the top of that mountain tomorrow. But when you get there, trust me, there's going to be another mountain to scale. And life is short, so make sure you're enjoying the journey and you're enjoying what you're trying to build. And when you do that, you give yourself permission and let go that you'll get there. It's just about a time, not if, but when. That is the right mindset to go into this game, and just start surrounding. So it's little things I can challenge people to do. We're all sitting at home. Get on the local RIA or real estate investment group meetups and start going to them 3 times a month, and go to the same one for the next 6 months. And I bet you, if you just by doing that, by just literally rocking up, you'll start to meet other people who think like you or who you aspire to be. Yes. And the second thing is, obviously, we're listening to podcasts right now. Continuing your self-education is really, really important. Practice gratitude and mindfulness is really important. And, I'm also big into fitness. Keep fit and make sure you've got the body right to make sure that the mind's right to go out and attack the day. And make sure you're even across all the playing fields. Business is just one of them. How's your health? How's your wealth? How's your love? Your relationships. So making sure all of that is being met. And again, you talk about paying the bills. You talk about having a day job. You talk about the spinning plates. I've had many spinning plates and thought I'd never get anywhere. But through consistency, through knowing that it wasn't an if but a when, that's what kept me going. And sometimes, some days I've been through dark times, but you've got to realize that we all go through dark times, and that's the power of surrounding yourself with other people you aspire to be. Because like that story I said about New York City when my buddy came down from Canada, I was like, dang, I'm going to try and be like him, Right. It's again about pushing those boundaries each and every day and what you're comfortable with. And that's what I think the pieces of advice that I bestow upon your listeners.
No, that's tremendous, Reed, to say the least. And, surrounding yourself with kind of people and how you broke down mindset, in terms of, and I've shared this with people, write down what you think the worst that can happen. Take it and write it down. Don't just dwell on it in your head. Take it, just take a sheet of paper, draw a line down the middle. On the left, write down just the worst abomination that could happen. Right. I mean, and be truthful with yourself. Everybody on Facebook will know. Or, my wife will leave me with the kids to take the kids, or the husband will run off with this, or, everything that or my mom's going to say, yep, I told you so, whatever it is that you think's the worst, I lose a bunch of money and people sue me, right? Whatever you think is the worst, write that down on the left-hand side. And then on the right, and what you'll do if that happens. Right. And so what you end up finding out is, the chances of that happening is really, I'm really talking about extremes outside the bell-shaped curve, right? And so the things that I'm fearful of are really complete one-offs that are just like, aliens showed up in the sky, or like you say, you get a global pandemic. January 1st, none of us were thinking anything about, a pandemic, and it affects all of us, right? So again, you can't start a business. Well, God, what if there's a worldwide pandemic virus? Reed, what am I going to do? It's like, you're going to do what you're going to do what you need to do.
It's a new wrinkle that we're all going to face with. This ain't the last pandemic we face, right? So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Man versus virus is nothing new. Yeah, it's been since the beginning of time. And so, so that's tremendous. NYB, I hope you take notes with what Reed is sharing. And when you get done listening with this podcast, there's one thing that you can take from this and be just a little bit better. And so, Reed Goossens is our guest today. You can check him out, reedgoossens.com. That's GOOSSENS.
Boom.
reedgoossens.com. And that's Reed with 2 E's. So REED. Make sure you go there. Purchase both books. Communicate with him. Let him know that you heard him right here on the Minding Your Business podcast. And again, subscribe to Investing in the U.S., the podcast by Reed Goossens. Reed, man, listen, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you coming on here. Man, we could probably talk all day about different things in real estate, man. But I know you've got a ton of things going on here on a Friday. So I appreciate you carving out some time for me and the MYB community.
Hey, mate, I just want to say that it was an absolute blast. I've enjoyed every single second of this. You're doing a great job, brother. Keep it up. And, hopefully we get to catch up in the near future. And I can't wait to have you on my show. So,
yeah, absolutely. And, we want to communicate that. I want to be able to come on your show. I'd love to have you back here, Reed, as you create additional content. And as you create additional content, I'd love to get communication on that so that I can share it with my network. I love to be able to do that. And so, listen, man, to you and your family, the very best. Be safe out here, man. And brother, if I can be a resource, let me know.
Peace, man. Be well.
All right. Sounds good, man. Take care. All right. So that was Reed Goossens. And, it is, it's great when you talk to like-minded people that you can enjoy, people that you have some connection to, it being in the same spaces and that sort of thing. So thank you so much to Reed for taking time out to join here on the Minding Your Business podcast. A couple things that I'll get out of here. Brandyourpod.com. I'd love to be your podcast partner to help you launch your own podcast. As you heard, Reed and I talk today about creating content. Podcast is a great way to create content, but then also it's a great way to own your own narrative. And that's a big thing in today's media market and content market, is you want to be able to own your own content. You want to own your own narrative. And that's a great way to do it. So you've been thinking about starting your podcast. I know you have. You've been talking about it, and you've been talking about it for some time. And so now's the time to do that. I'd love to be able to help you. Brandyourpod.com. Hey, listen, and I'm going to share this with Reed too, but we have our financial demo with Leverage. That's leveragecalc.com. I'm excited to be a partner in Leverage, and I will be hosting the first of what will be several live demos. The first one is Wednesday, August the 5th at 12 p.m. Central Time. That's 12 p.m. Central Time on August the 5th. You can go to brooksbrothersconsulting.com/leverage. brooksbrothersconsulting.com/leverage. Register for the live demo. If you're unable to attend, if you've got other things that you're already on your calendar, go ahead and register anyway. So that way you can receive the recorded copy of the demo. It's going to be about a 45-minute demo. I will have John Matheson, who is the president and CEO of Leverage, as well as Stormy, who is in business development. The two of them, who are tremendous, just tremendous people. And I don't want to sound like, President Trump when I say that, but they are tremendous people in John Matheson and Stormy Scott with Leverage. They're going to lead the presentation of the financial software, which helps real estate investors as well as business owners be able to level the playing field with your lender, and knowing whether a deal's viable and whether you will be approved prior to having that conversation with your bank or lender. So that's tremendous. Oftentimes you go into a conversation with your lender and you're at a bit of a disadvantage because they know the underwriting criteria and you don't, right? And they know what's viable, but you may not. And so you want to make sure that deals that you do and funding that you seek for your business makes sense and that you can get approved for it at the terms that you should be approved for. And so that's what this software does. So you can go to lendingcalc.com to see it, but go to brooksbrothersconsulting.com/leverage to register for the free demo. Listen, I'm gonna get out of here. Champ Ron, the Minding Your Business podcast. Enjoy all that is to come within positivity for the rest of your day and your week. We'll be back with episode number 181. Sorry, this is 181. We'll be back with episode 182 of the Minding Your Business podcast. Go to mybpodcast.com.